Thank you. Okay, so now for the questions, I'm going to ask Fidelma, Raquel, and you, Laura, to come here to answer to the questions. Creo que os podéis sentar. ¿Sí? ¿Sí?
Microphone?
Yeah. Okay, thank you. This is not really a question, but more a comment, and I think this comment is related to Raquel's presentation. So what the right ethnic race categories are is a very difficult question, especially when we want to use trial data globally. It is important to acknowledge that those categories are important, not just because of potential genetic differences, but also because they can reflect important socio-economic differences that impact disease, food, health care, pollution, etc. Sorry. So I think this is more a comment than really a question, but it...
Yeah. I agree totally with the statement. It is true, and a couple of examples that I have showed reflects clearly how differences in ethnicity can have different outcome with the same drug. Moving forward, of course, that level of differentiation still to be established, and depending on the disease, it might be different, as I said during the presentation. But what is clear is that there is something behind that, and as much as data as we can collect, the better informed decisions that we can make afterwards. So yeah, it's a reality. We have to work to address as much as possible. Thank you.
Thanks. This is a question for Fidelma. I noticed on one of your slides, you were showing how many people you'd approached and then how many people were randomized. And I noticed it said for one of the reasons why women didn't take part was that their partners, 200 partners, disagreed with participation. So a two-part question. So the first bit is, did you work with partners to try and see whether together the woman and the partner would be willing to take part? And the second part is, were there any patterns with regard to social group, with regard to which partners said, no, actually, I'm not happy with my partner taking part?
Okay, so 200 out of 2,300 and something represented 7.5%. So on the when you look at it broadly, it was still a small percentage. When we identified that as part of, why did you come into the trial, the first two pieces of qualitative work that we did, we then started to invite partners to come to the visit where we discussed about the trial before they ever went into the consent process. And when we invited partners, yes, a lot of them came. And when they came, those ladies generally decided to participate. The group in particular, I think, when I reflect back, that was more likely to refuse participation based on a partner was the Asian subgroup. In that group as well, it was often the mother-in-law was the person. So when you began to ask women what individuals in your family group affected your participation, partner was the first one, then the second one was often the mother-in-law type of person. So when we had that information, we decided to implement this extra clinic so that instead of trying to do all of this in a busy obstetric antenatal clinic with diabetes management, that we took it out of there, spent a lot of time with the discussion, including the partner answering questions, being open, developing trust, improving that coordination and collaboration between patients and the clinical team. And that really improved our participation and consent rate, because for the first 6 months our consent rate was terrible, and we thought, what is going on? Why can't we do that? And one of the things was we were trying to consent in a very busy clinical space. Then we generated this additional clinic. And the second was that the first contact with the patient at that time was a research nurse who they had never seen before. And the women just didn't want that. They wanted to discuss the trial with the PEI or the sub-PIs who were doing the clinic. So when we changed to that then, there was a huge uptake in participation. So every single person with a diagnosis of GDM during that time period in 2 separate clinics, one rural and one urban, was seen by the PI and co-PI. So there was no person excluded from the outset. And I think that was important too, because when we saw women to discuss the trial and then said, but you're not really suitable for the trial for the following reason. That was really important, because as time went on, those ladies were sitting in the clinical space waiting for their clinical care alongside people who had gone into the trial. And we wanted to ensure that they didn't feel left out in any way, because this, seeking testimonials from other women was an important consideration. So all those things changed our practice really of the recruitment process.
Thank you. So this is actually a really wonderful question, because it dovetails nicely with what I wanted to ask, which is stepping outside of the box of participants and patients, but looking at the general public as a whole and the knowledge gap about what clinical trials are and what the potential positive outcomes are from those. So I wanted to ask a very general question, and again, kind of stepping out of the box for a minute, but I think this is a good example of how partners, family, friends are people that we confide in when we're faced with potentially going into a clinical trial. I was in a clinical trial long before I went into the career field. I had never heard of one before that. So how do we, what are your thoughts on introducing clinical trials to the public in general? So before someone becomes a patient or becomes a participant, what are your thoughts about that? And do you know of any initiatives that are underway to close that knowledge gap for the general public?
So I can answer from an Irish perspective. The Health Research Board had a call for trials in action recently, and we were awarded funding to make a video, which will be a video with patients and with the public to dispel the myths about going into a clinical trial. And the beauty of working with the group that we're working with, which is a group called Curam, is that the video, when it's ready, will actually be screened in cinemas around the country. So it's a starting point to try and engage patients and the public. And one of the take-home messages that we want to get across is that you can participate in a trial even without being in the trial. You can help us with the design of the trial, the materials, the dissemination, the follow-up, etc. You don't actually have to come into the trial, but your contributions are a really significant and important part of the clinical trial landscape. So we'll see how that goes. That's something that we're doing locally.
Just one minor thing. I think that researchers in general don't know how to disseminate our science. We know how to disseminate it to a very specific public, to a scientific public, but when it comes to explain it to the general population, we really fail on that. And we have to approach the general population, explain what the clinical trial is, what are their fears, and how can we help on that. And I think this type of work is really important in this sense. We have to generate trust on ourselves.
Just a minor mention as well. Already, and we will know that, there is a specific work package in which the intent is to increase the level of awareness about what a clinical trial is for any kind of a given population. So totally agree that increasing the level of awareness is a first gate to get access to the clinical trials, yes.
There is another question online, which is for Laura. For the second study on dementia, what were the cultural and relational barriers that they address in the recruitment and design, and how were these barriers determined in the first place?
Sorry. Can you hear me? Yes. Maybe I don't explain it. I'm not sure. The second study, so the one that we are conducting, we have been awarded with a FEES grant, but we are about to start now. So maybe I cannot answer yet, but hopefully on the next edition I will do. But in general, the thing is that we will try to assess all the possible barriers, the ones that are really expressed by the community by the participants, and see which works best. Okay, sorry.
And one from back here.
As far as my knowledge goes, when it comes to high-risk trials involving children, both parents have to consent to the trials. I'm just wondering, when it comes to pregnant women going into trials, what makes it different? Why don't you need the partner's consent in the trial as well?
I never thought of that. I really can't answer you. I don't know why you don't need consent of the second parent. I guess because the infant is in utero and is not yet a person that needs to be consented by the partner. Maybe Sean would know why you don't have to. I don't. Yeah.
So whether it's one parent or two parents has to consent is dependent on the legal status in that country. So some it's what you have to require both parents. In the UK, it's one parent, and it's my understanding that the baby is the responsibility of the mother until birth. And as soon as birth takes place, then that law changes depending on which governing body you're under.
And in Ireland, it's one parent as well.
Do we have time?
Oh, yeah. I have a question for you. It's very interesting what you have said about the pregnant woman. I'm just wondering, from the scientific point of view, is there anything that, from the preclinical data, that is asked for a protocol designed for pregnant woman that is different from other type of population? Is there anything that you know?
No.
No. Okay.
No, there's no specific requirements asked. But as time goes on, in the protocol for these type of trials, we are tending to use core outcome sets. So we've designed and collected information on a number of core outcome sets, which includes many different groupings in determining what are the outcomes that we would like to influence or have knowledge on in a clinical trial in this space. And because we're all beginning to use those core outcome sets now, you can see what's important. And, you know, for me, the glucose control may be important, but if you ask women, Caucasian and other ethnicities, they don't really care about that. They care about how long will I be in hospital having my baby, or will that medication affect my breastfeeding rate, or will I have a cesarean section? So they're not concerned about, say, congenital anomalies of the baby, the size of the baby, the glycemic control that the clinician and researcher would be keen on knowing about. So I think it is important in any disease space, be that in pregnancy or otherwise, to establish by bringing together a large group, which includes, you know, the types of people that will engage in your type of trials, to establish what are the core outcome sets that we need to measure in this trial and subsequent trials of the same nature, because then we can combine the data. So although, you know, our trial had 535 participants, enough for the primary outcome, if we had 5,000 participants, you know, if we were all measuring the same thing, we had 5,000 participants, you know, around the world, then it gives great credibility and validity to what you're doing. Yes. So I think core outcome sets are a way in which patients and the public can become involved in addition to researchers and clinicians that really can influence the space around clinical trial.
Thank you.